Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar coming at you with the significant horrors of the universe, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you know, one thing that I don't like, ladies and gentlemen, is subscription services. You ever feel like there's a subscription to basically everything? You want to play a video game? There's like a Game Pass here, there's a GeForce Now there. You ever go to you ever just want to watch like some television show? You go online and it's like, what streaming service out of the 300 do I have to find and purchase? You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's this reason why I've actually just started backing up all of my own games, movies, and music, because there ain't no way that I'm paying like 10, 15, whatever dollars a month I need to access media that keeps going in and out. Now, I talked about this a few days ago, but for anybody that doesn't know, ladies and gentlemen, old Jeffrey Bezos is part of the world where he wants to eventually see computers move to the cloud. So, you know, the little that you do own basically is taken away. Do you like owning your computer, your little laptop, your gaming system? Yeah, well, the billionaire of the world doesn't want you to fucking own anything. So listen to this shit.
And I looked at this and I thought, this is what computation is like today. Everybody has their own data center. And that's not going to last. It makes no sense. You're going to buy compute off the grid. That's AWS. We were doing it internally at Amazon for ourselves, and the APIs were created. That's a very interesting story in its own right. But this is, you know, these kind of horizontal layers like electricity and compute and now artificial intelligence, they go everywhere. I guarantee you there is not a single application that you can think of that is not going to be made better by AI.
You know, man, I'm gonna be completely real with you. I think billionaires live in like this weird fucking bubble that nobody can truly grasp. No, that's a bullshit way of saying it. Basically, the idea that he's saying, and I'm gonna add the extra context as well because I don't want you thinking that he's saying this out of nowhere. Now, he's talking about data centers, which obviously are these huge areas where they have tons of computing processing occur. Data centers are not new. A lot of the, you know, services we use, like YouTube, for instance, relies on tons of data centers around the world hosting tons of video files and are able to process and distribute them as soon as anybody clicks on an actual video, like you did for this video. So again, that is not something that Jeff Bezos is entirely wrong about. Consolidation does economically mean better things, but when he's talking about like, you know, the compute doesn't make sense, he's actually not entirely wrong in the situation too, and it hurts me to almost say this because, you know, yes, having one GPU, one RTX 5090, you know, sitting inside a data center that can be rented out for, I don't know, like $20 a month by somebody, right? Basically rented out for its access is probably better than just selling these things to one specific person en masse. Obviously, for a lot of these companies that are participating in the AI bubble that is out here, it is better for them to own all the RAM, all the GPU, all of the compute, so that you, buddy, can actually go right to them and give your money a month and basically have it only accessible by a few people around the world. That's really the end stage of all of this shit. Like, obviously, you all understand that it's bad when a few companies own everything. Basically, they want you to have a system where, like, you can't use AI, for instance, like you only have the ability to go to things like ChatGPT. You only have the ability to go things like Microsoft Copilot, God forbid. And of course, you only have the ability to go to like, you know, the AI distributors in the world because they have all the hardware and you can access that hardware if you pay per month and you go through their web browser or whatever application they offer. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that, you know, your phones and basic compute is going to be gone. But really, the future, at least if these guys got their wishes, would be that basically the serious hardware that you can buy right now, like GPUs, high-end CPUs, RAM in any capacity, would never be sold to you because they could just hoard all of it. Because here's the thing, if you buy your own GPU, your own RAM, your yada yada yada, you can actually run your own fucking AIs and your own video games without relying on these companies hosting shit for you. You know, I've shown you on my channel tons of times where you can run things like DeepSeek, Quen, American open models without ever touching the frontier models. You can even connect these bastards to the internet and have them do Google searches for you. What a novel concept. Now, of course, this is obviously one of those realities that I really think, like, back in 2018, this, like, video came out, and I feel like people kind of made fun of it. But it was from the World Economic Forum, where they had 8 predictions for the world in 2030. And one of them was actually literally in the first 6 seconds of it, it's like, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So again, obviously, that comes across really weird. But it's not really weird, because if you look at the direction that tech and subscriptions and all this shit is taking, Jeff Bezos, like many of the billionaires, Jeff is the only one to take the mask off and pretty much tell everyone how they really feel. Now, obviously, as you all know, I am a preservationist. I love talking about computer technology. I'm very much against this practice. And I make tons of videos teaching people how to stay away from this practice. Do you not want to use big artificial intelligences locked to the cloud? You can download open weight models using things like Ollama, which is a freely downloadable server. You can even connect it through something known as Open Web UI, so it looks more closer to something like ChatGPT. And Bob's your uncle, you can actually use a local AI. But Muda, what if I needed to connect to the internet? You can use multiple things like CRX and G as a local searching instance and plug your AI into that, meaning that it can actually search through the internet. Or you can use stuff like Perplexica, where you can actually browse the internet and have an open source answering engine without paying somebody monthly for it, right? And here's the best part. All of your shit is private, okay? I can look up whatever I want and it won't share it with these big, scary companies, okay? Especially companies that are aligned with the US government and tons of surveillance shit there. On the opposite end, when it comes to computer hardware, one of the most wholesome things that I saw was this post right here. Now, this is something somebody shared. This is from like a computer store where somebody could go and pick up this computer for $20. Now, this computer is not powerful or anything, and it's an Intel Celeron 1.6 gigahertz CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, and it comes with Ubuntu 16.04, which is actually so old because the current Ubuntu is like 24.04. So this image is obviously a fair bit old, but you can see that somebody took what is effectively hardware that isn't supported by Windows. This is actually so old that it meets the minimum requirements for like Windows 8 and 10. This is hardware that has brought back to life, and you can use Linux on it, and you can browse the internet, you can do other very basic things on this device. This thing doesn't have to be thrown out, it can still be used. And it's powerful enough that you could probably watch a few videos on it. You might be able to use it as a very basic media distribution server in your house. But companies wouldn't want you to own this, because if you could actually own and self-host your own shit, you wouldn't need to be paying them monthly to access things like video games. Now, I'm not surprised that companies like Amazon say this kind of shit, and Jeff Bezos says this, because it's beneficial for him that nobody has access to graphics cards, because then you can purchase your video game access through searches like Luna, for instance, which is Amazon's game cloud streaming service. So imagine, right, you want to play something like Hogwarts Legacy, okay, or Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Very great game. Instead of buying this game and having it running locally on your system, you can now run it through their actual service. But here's the issue that I've always had with things like cloud streaming is what happens when the game has its access completely revoked. Imagine if you live in a future where all of your compute is done through a private server. Let's say we live in 2034, we lost the war on self-ownership, now we have to go through Amazon to play Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now, by 2034, this game may be so fucking old. Actually, we'll fast forward to like 2040, okay? Because everyone's like, but Muda, who plays games that are old? Tons of people do. This game is so old that Amazon has delisted it. Maybe they lost the licenses to Indiana Jones, whatever, it's gone. Now you lost your access to playing the fucking video game. But if you own your own computer, that doesn't really have to matter. Now here's a really great example. Tons of games get delisted. Tons of games actually aren't even available. Metal Gear Solid 4 for the PlayStation is not available for streaming. You cannot purchase this game anymore. Now, if you happen to own a copy of it sitting around in your house, which I do, you can actually emulate it on your local compute hardware, right? Now, it's as simple as taking a PlayStation controller like this, connecting it, you can connect any controller really, I just use PlayStation for PlayStation emulation. And the best part about emulators, ladies and gentlemen, is you can go to the emulator, you can fire that shit right up. Now, the funny thing about this is it not only runs exceptionally well, obviously if you have the hardware for it, but over time, if, the world doesn't shift to a cloud-only world, it'll only get easier for the average person to keep this game alive, right? Regardless of Sony, regardless of Konami, you're able to preserve your product and actually keep it and keep your access, which I think is really the most important thing. It's not so much about playing the video game, it's more about having your access available. Now, the other thing that also really hits me too is like, obviously, these companies would enjoy it if you lost access to the ability to locally run and actually own your stuff. Because once you lose the ability, here, I'll show you a good example of stuff that's happening in real time. There's a site called Delisted Games that, I've talked about before, but one of the most recent delistings that literally just happened yesterday, for anybody that doesn't know, was Yakuza 3. Now, Yakuza 3 is an incredibly old game. But it was actually a game that was remastered not too long ago for the PlayStation 4, PC, and everything. Now, unfortunately, it is looking to be delisted. Now, the thing about this game is that I actually ended up buying this, like, physically, the Yakuza, complete collection. And, of course, I buy all the Yakuza stuff because I'm actually a huge fan of it. I love owning the stuff, meaning that without the internet, I can put this onto my fucking PlayStation and be able to actually play the game. So here's the thing. The game is being removed, right? So since it's being removed, obviously you might be like, well, what's the only option left? This is a game that currently, right now, costs 30 Canadian dollars to get. How much does the remake cost, which is the reason that it's being delisted? Well, that costs, ladies and gentlemen, somewhere around 80 gosh darn dollars. Now, this is also something that very similarly happened with Yakuza 0, but it's insane to me to see them remove a game from people's libraries. Not remove from libraries, but remove a cheaper option to buy simply so they can sell a more expensive option down the road. An option that is currently gone through so much backlash because the actual team kept an actor, Teruyuki Kagawa. Teruyuki Kagawa, for anybody that doesn't know, is somebody that actually very much apologized publicly for apparently allegedly groping a hostess at a hostess club, right? This was a shocking report that surfaced where he groped a hostess's breasts, took off her bra, and passed it around to colleagues in 2019. Yeah, by the way, Sega is the same company that allows this shit, but they were very, very easy, very quickly to throw Pierre Taki under the bus when he was caught, or arrested for cocaine usage. And again, I don't know if it's like alleged or whatever. I think maybe the charges actually in that case were completely dropped. So in one case, doing a line of cocaine allegedly will get you removed from games like Judgment. But I guess taking off some person's bra without their consent and throwing it around for the boys, that's fucking cool. What do I say? Why not? I mean, we live in a world where like a pedophile is able to where pedophiles are running the government and shit, dude. I mean, we live in clown world is what it is. But yeah, that suddenly is an option and the game is getting removed because they can sell you a more higher end option. Now, the thing is, ultimately, at the end of the day, the companies enjoy it when they can take away any option left from you, the user. Now, ultimately, a lot of this is not just about games, it's about owning the stuff that you have, right? A lot of these companies really enjoy it when they can take away your access from actual ownership. Guys like Jeff Bezos are creaming at the thought of taking away the ability for you to preserve and locally have access to your shit, just so they can sell you streaming services, and if it comes to the world of artificial intelligence, locking you out of AI and making sure that nobody can just freely download models and run them themselves, that the only way to access this technology is through like 5 billionaires in the world that basically ruin it for the rest of the people out there. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's the future of the world that these scumbags want. And this is why, again, ultimately, at the end of the day, my videos are not meant to fearmonger or be defeatist or doomerist about the situation. There are still ways that you can reject this and fight back, right? Obviously, don't buy the subscription services and be participant to them when you can self-host your own media files through things like Jellyfin, for instance. Don't be somebody that needs to go to their services for video games when, if you even care about cloud streaming, you can set up your own local cloud streaming service as well too. Hell, running your games locally is still always an option. One of the things that I have very much done for the last few years is when it comes to live service stuff or online only experiences, generally I've just started to play games from my backlog that even if they're like 10 over 10 years old, at least I can locally play and run them and at least enjoy it. And at least sends a message to these companies that, you know, when it comes to people who want their stuff, you can still locally purchase your stuff. You can still require your stuff to run without internet. You can support developers, publishers, you know, people that write software that support your right to ownership. You know, if we ever get to a point where, you know, computers are going to be rented over the cloud, at least we know that with options like Linux, for instance, and the emulators that we do have, that there will still somewhere be a community of individuals that will be using older, maybe not, you know, as new maybe hopefully we never get to a point where like the computer itself is completely cloud hosted. That's the only issue. But for now, there are ways to sort of reject the subscriptions. You don't need to be using proprietary software. You don't need to be using software that is so disrespectful of you, the user. It's one of the reasons I don't use things like Microsoft Windows, right? Why use something that you know is absolutely deplorable, something that doesn't care about you, the user, something that is constantly breaking on a near weekly basis when there are alternatives that exist, alternatives that entirely aren't perfect, but they're there, okay? You know, I think with things like local AIs, Linux, emulation, a lot of these technologies that I've talked about in the form of game preservation or just preservation in general are really going to start showing their advantages when people realize that, you know, when these companies start yoinking away your local access, and people are starting to talk about a little bit more, start to realize that there needs to be a shift and a severe rejection of this crap before it gets too worse. At least that's what I fucking hope. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it if you dislike it, I am out.